This is the ultimate study guide for DKUSH test number 2, Neumeyer, of course. We're going to start with the treaty signed on Christmas Eve in 1814, ending the War of 1812. What treaty was that? Well, that was the Treaty of Ghent. Kentucky-Virginia resolutions. Jefferson felt that the states had the power to cancel any federal laws within their border. This is something that's gone long by the wayside. Warhawks. Supported the war in the South and West. Example, Henry Clay and John Calhoun. They were both warhawks, and they were war supporters. Clark and his buddy Lewis explored and mapped the West. The first Secretary of State, he saw the future of small, independent farmers. Of course, that is Thomas Jefferson. It was really important. Missouri Compromise. Well, the Missouri Compromise was the congressional compromise in which Missouri entered the Union as a slave state and Maine was admitted as a free state. Preserved the balance of slave and free states in Congress. Drew an imaginary line at 36 degrees 30 minutes through the Louisiana Territory. Slavery prohibited north of this line. So this was really important in the events leading to the Civil War. Missouri Compromise. Thomas Jefferson was, of course, first Secretary of State of Foreign Affairs. He was the third president of the United States and was a Renaissance man. British naval seamen kidnapping Americans. This was a serious issue. It was called impressment. They were really trying to prevent this. After the war had ended, the British were still capturing Americans because they were bitter, I guess. Battle after the War of 1812 was officially over. Jackson was there. So this is the Battle of New Orleans. Jackson defeated the British at the Battle of New Orleans, but this was long after the war had already officially ended. Henry David Thoreau. He wrote the essay Resistance to Civil Government. He claimed people should refuse to obey unjust laws. They had a moral right of civil disobedience to disobey certain laws. Walden Pond, Thoreau tax protester, jailed. Emerson says, "What are you doing in there?" So Emerson is asking him, "What are you doing in there, Henry David Thoreau?" And then Henry David Thoreau asks him, "What are you doing out there?" So it's a little bit of a kind of a back and forth there. The first Supreme Court, it had 6 members. It's going to expand to 9 members like today. Madbury versus Madison. That's really important. Madbury, who sought political office, was denied his commission by Madison, Jefferson's Secretary of State. Madbury sued Madison and demanded his office, and Adams appointed 16 federal judges before midnight that night. The case went to the Supreme Court, of course, and John Marshall as the Chief Justice. Acts of Congress can now be ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. XYZ affair. Americans learned that 3 French officials identified in diplomatic correspondence as X, Y, and Z demanded a bribe from America's diplomats as the price of beginning negotiations. Now, this is the French, the poor-ass French, trying to get some cash in return for their help in the revolution. And sure, we appreciate your help, but the government was not willing to give up so much. Seneca Falls Convention. This was important for women's history. The Convention of Women's Rights Supporters held in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848. Attendees drafted a declaration of sentiments and resolutions which declared that all men and women are in fact created equal. Spirituals. Religious songs created by slaves. Spirituals' symbolism drew heavily on biblical themes. Slaves had hybrid Christianity. This was kind of a weird time for slavery as far as religion. Temperance. This was the movement that developed a response to concern over the rising levels of alcohol consumption in American society. It was the 18th Amendment in 1920. This was, of course, prohibition, which caused alcohol to become an illegal drug. Tippecanoe and Tyler too. This was the motto of the Tippecanoe campaign for presidency. It was, of course, I don't know what it was, but I just know that I don't know if it was a success. If it was, Tippecanoe was not president for very long. I know that. Jefferson's home in Virginia. Well, that was, of course, Monticello. We know all about that. Democracy in America. Count Alexis of Tocqueville. That's my best guess. Tocqueville's analysis of the influence of democracy equality on American life, first published in America in 1838. And remains one of the most important commentaries in American society ever written. So this is a piece, a literary piece written by Count Alexis de Tocqueville, and it's an analysis of the influence of democracy and equality on American life. Jefferson defeated him in 1804. This is Charles Pinckney of South Carolina, was defeated by I think it's Pinckney. I don't know, of South Carolina. Jefferson defeated him in 1804. I don't know what he defeated him doing, but he did. He defeated him. Jay's Treaty. Now, this is a diplomatic treaty negotiated by Federalist John Jay in 1794. Britain agreed to compensate America for cargoes seized in 93 to 94. Of course, Britain was still doing that after that. Britain promised to vacate forts in the Northwest Territory, though they took a hell of a long time to do it. Number one immigrant group in the 1840s and 50s left potato famine behind. That is the Irish. The potato famine in Ireland was a serious issue, so they all fleed here. And now we have a ton of white people with Irish ancestry. Francis Scott Key. Now, this is a Star-Spangled Banner. Of course, we know he wrote it while he was in the brig of a British ship looking out at the battlefield while the Brits were fighting the Americans and the flag was still standing. End of Jackson's presidency. Well, Jackson stepped aside after 2 terms and kind of cemented that precedent. Tuberculosis and musketball by lung. No, TB stands for tuberculosis. Dropsy dies 1845, buried in Nashville. Jackson's nickname was Old Hickory. Indians shafted the 5 civilized tribes. That was the Cherokees, Chickasaws, Choctaws, Creeks, and Seminoles. Utopias. Joseph Smith, Jr., founder of Mormons, and Brigham Young replaces him after his death. Polygamy in the 1800s. So Utopias was a very, very Mormon concept. He was the president who sent Lewis and Clark on their trip, spoke 5 languages, of course, Thomas Jefferson. Who else would have spoken 5 languages? Amendment dealing with the right to bear arms. That's the Second Amendment. It's a very, very controversial topic even today. Wrote Star-Spangled Banner during War of 1812. He is the greatest of all time. Francis Scott Key. Well, that's the same thing we already talked about. Plotted a pirate army to invade the Southwest and Mexico with Pike and Wilkinson. This is, of course, Alan Burr. Conspiring against us, as always. Bill of Rights was the first 10 of the original 12 amendments to the Constitution, which include protections for basic... We all know what the Bill of Rights is. Reaper guy, not Grimm, okay? So we're talking Cyrus McCormick was the Reaper guy. I have no idea. Judicial review. This is the idea that courts might strike down acts of legislature. Very, very important concept. The spoil system is, of course, the name applied to Jackson's system, replacing government office holders with those loyal to only him. Impressment. This is a British idea of practice of forcing merchant seamen to serve in the British Navy. They were doing this long after the wars were over. First Secretary of Treasury. Whiskey Rebellion started because of his policies. This is, of course, Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton spearheaded the Whiskey Rebellion. Amendment banning quartering of troops. Now, of course, this is the Third Amendment. Not all that important in today's world, but was very important back then. Dorothy Dix. Concerned about the mentally ill. She kind of revolutionized the whole thing. Put in prisons and straitjackets instead of asylums. And lobotomy. So, she was very disappointed in how we were treating our mentally ill and did a lot to fix it. That was Dorothea Dix. He advocated tariffs and investments in roads. A war hawk. Well, this is Henry Clay. Henry Clay was one of the main war hawks. And there's, of course, people that supported having a war with, I forgot who. Farewell address. This was in his farewell address. Washington stated that he opposed permanent alliances and the political parties could ruin the country. He was absolutely correct about that. Household slaves often worked as maids and cooks. 1828 election. Old Hickory Andrew Jackson wins the 7th president. Okay, so billiards table in the White House. Adams, gambler. Mudslinger between parties continues. And Jackson's wife is a bigamist and dies at Christmas time. Jackson is killed in a duel. He was a supporter of education and public schools. Well, Horace Mann was a primary supporter of education and public schools and helped institute the whole system. Uncle who lost a finger, combining Neumeyer's Uncle Jerry. Yes, Neumeyer's Uncle Jerry lost a finger on getting off the combine. Doctrine must allow European Spanish, especially Spanish interference in Americas. This is the Monroe Doctrine. It does not allow European interference in the Americas. This is really important because of colonization. What was the economic significance of Eli Whitney's cotton gin? Well, it happened in 1792. Of course, this is the height of slavery, and he was a Yale graduate. So 50 times more productive than by hand. So this cotton gin meant that it was more productive than 50 slaves doing this by hand. So it easily removed seeds from cotton and revolutionized the production of the South. 2/3 of the world's cotton came from the South by 1860. This was revolutionary. He plotted a revolt, insurrection, not Nat Turner. Okay, so this was Denmark Vesey, he plotted a revolt. Now, this is someone who's not Nat Turner. Lightweight steel plow. Nothing runs like a deer. That's John Deere, of course. Battle of New Orleans. This is a battle in which Jackson defeated the British at New Orleans, and the treaty had already been signed, but he gains national fame anyway. 700 British and only 8 Americans died. Jefferson and his buddy died the same day, July 4th, 1826, and the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson died on the same day. And when John Adams died, I think it was John Adams, maybe it was Jefferson, one of them, whoever died last, he said, I really hope that, or I'm at least my buddy Thomas Jefferson, or not John Adams, lives. And of course he was wrong because he'd already died that day. 50th anniversary, July 4th. Okay, okay, no, it was Adams, okay. At 6 p.m., Adams said, at least my friend Thomas Jefferson survives. Lol, he already died at 1 p.m. Getting around, okay. Canals, railroads, okay, Bazea, this is interesting. Canals, railroads, National Road, 1807 steamboat, Robert Fulton, 5 miles an hour. Strange man. Robert Fulton was a strange man. And that was a steamboat from 1807, and there was national roads, and there was highway, and there was railroads. Telegraph. We're talking invention patented by Samuel Morse in 1837 that used electricity to send coded messages over wires, making communication nearly instantaneous. This was important. Shakers was quite the opposite of Mormon polygamy, celibacy. The state of abstaining from marriage and sexual relations. About half a dozen left. Shakers reconfigured the traditional family. There was neither marriage nor sex between men and women, so of course not too many Shakers are around anymore. Textile mills and immigration. Holy crap. Like, this is ridiculously long, Isaiah. I've been doing this for 12 minutes. Most in the Northeast. Lowell system. German immigrants differed from Irish immigrants in that they tended to have more skills. Irish were the number one group, mostly to escape the potato famine. Germans were the second largest group, and in 1840s and 1850s, the greatest proportion of immigrants were from Ireland, and the urban growth populations grew rapidly in 19th century because because both immigration and the migration of Americans from rural areas. Louisiana Purchase. This was the U.S. acquisition of Louisiana Territory from France in 1803, and it doubled the size of the U.S., was explored by Lewis and Clark. The evolution of communication. Pony Express. Telegraph to telephone, party lines to fax to email to cell phones and text messages. Okay? Canceling federal law by the state. So this is important. The concept called nullification, of course, is not that important anymore. He won the election in 1836. We're talking Martin Van Buren. Van Buren. Martin Van Buren won in 1836. Alexander Hamilton was the first sec of Treasury in George Washington's cabinet. We're talking Panic of 1819, a downturn in the American economy in 1819 that plunged the nation in depression and economic hardship. Of course, we called depressions panics back then. Nullification. We've talked about nullification so much, I'm skipping it. Nat Turner's rebellion. 1831 slave uprising. This is Nat Turner from earlier. 1831 slave uprising in Virginia led by Nat Turner. This is a slave uprising that shocked many in the South and led to a host of new repressive measures against slaves. He was hanged. Largest slave revolt in U.S. history, and 60 whites killed and about 200 slaves. They were a celibate religious group. These are Shakers. Why are we repeating things? Indian resistance movement. We're talking Shawnee leaders, Tenskawa and Takashume, planned to unite Indian tribes to repel white encroachments in Ohio, and Indian Harrison attacked the natives at Tippecanoe. 10 amendments ratified by 1971. Those, of course, the Constitution. Farmers. Most farmers grew enough food to feed their own families by 1850. Purchase of U.S. from France. Purchased by U.S. from France in 1803. The Louisiana Purchase. See, what? Invented the telegraph. Samuel Morse. Complex marriage. A system developed by John Humphrey Noyes' followers in Oneida, in which any man or woman who has had experienced saving grace was free to engage in sexual relations with any person. Sexual behavior was regulated by him. He was accused of sex with a minor and fled to Canada. Okay, John Humphrey. Oneida, in which any man or woman who experienced saving grace was free to engage in sexual relationships with any other person. Whigs. Annie Jackson political party Whigs supported Clay's American system and a stronger central government. This is kind of a debate today still. Slaves escape. Okay, so 76% of those escaping were under age 35. Why? 89% were men. Why? They ran on weekends and holidays, mostly carrying pepper, hiding in the day and running at night. If caught, whippings and ankles are broken. Not many escapes were successful, but they still tried. Harriet Tubman would help run the Underground Railroad, helping hundreds escape. The Underground Railroad is really not that significant. Harriet Tubman and them like to get a hell of a lot of credit for freeing slaves, but they freed maybe 150. I mean, great, but it was 150. There were millions. Anyway, produced in mill factories in North England and New York, textiles. African-American freeman, Denmark Vesey. Okay, so he was charged with starting an insurrection, a violent uprising against an authority of government. So this was African-American freeman. So Denmark Vesey was trying to start an uprising. German immigrants seemed to have more skills than the Irish. The Irish were just kind of they moved south and became what we know today as rednecks. Crop dominating south, cotton. So the cotton, of course, dominated south, obviously. Studied shape of skull for a person's intelligence and character. This is stupid phrenology, okay? 1804 election. Burr's plot of conspiracy with Wilkinson and Pike to invade Mexico. They were not found guilty. Hamilton ran an ad against Burr in the paper, calling him a scoundrel during the 1804 campaign of governors for New York. Burr shoots Hamilton, and he dies at the age of 49. So that was quite a nasty election. Now, Hamilton, of course, lost in that exchange. Free State joined the Union around 1820. This is Maine. Joined with Missouri. Lobotomy. This is the practice of a surgical operation involving incision or the peripheral lobe of the brain into the peripheral lobe of the brain, formerly used to treat mental illness. It was a stupid practice. Penitentiary. This is a new reform-based model of incarceration that has isolated individuals from one another and gave them a chance to repent and reform. Type of bargain costing Jackson presidency in 1825. By the way, Adams and Clay. This is corrupt. By the way, Adams and Clay. I don't get it. Monroe Doctrine. Okay, so it was a corrupt bargain that cost Jackson the presidency in 1824. That's why phrase it like that? Monroe Doctrine, a foreign policy statement by President Monroe that declared that the Americas were no longer open to colonization. The U.S. would view any effort to control independent nations in the Western Hemisphere as a threat to America and retaliate. Phrenology, the study of the shape and the size of the cranium, as opposed to indication of character and mental abilities. Why we're repeating ourselves. County election. We're talking white male suffrage expands. 15th Amendment, 1870 expands to black males. Okay? Jefferson was a Renaissance man. He's a Renaissance man. We know why he's a Renaissance man. John Adams, first vice president, the vice president who was the runner-up in the presidential election back then. Act in 1807 to stop trade with France and England. This was the Embargo Act of 1807. So we were trying to put a damper on France and England stuff. Life in the slave quarters. Slaves often married using their own rituals and sometimes married those on other plantations. Planters often encouraged marriage. They were not recognized as legal according to the law, however. Cotton was the number one crop in much of the South. We know this. Alexander Hamilton agreed to move the capital to Northern Virginia, New York, if Jefferson and Madison supported his debt plan. Cherokee cases. Okay, so Cherokee Nation versus Georgia and the Worcester versus Georgia, the two cases in which the Supreme Court of the United States determined that Indian nations retained certain rights of sovereign nations, but did not enjoy the full powers of a sovereign nation. Indian Removal Act of 1830, we're talking legislation that gave President Jackson the authority to remove Native American tribes to lands west of the Mississippi, allowing valuable lands and natural resources to be taken. Kind of a mean thing to do. Supporters wanted a ban on alcohol. This is the temperance movement. Fool shot our buddy in the $10 bill in a duel. Aaron Burr shot your boy Alexander Hamilton, who's not on the 20. I don't think. Let me look this up. Not on the 10. He's on the 20. Oh, no. Never mind. Who is on the 10? Let me look this up. That's Jefferson that's on the 10. Alexander. Well, no, I'm wrong. Where's Jefferson? What is Jefferson on? Oh, he's on the $2 bill. Forgot about that. All right, sorry about that. Just a little detour. I could have sworn it was Alexander Hamilton was on the 20. Treaty of Ghent in 1814. This ends the War of 1812. Chesapeake Affair. Okay, in 1807, an incident where the British ship, the Leopard. Okay. In 1807, incident when the British ship, the Leopard, fired an American Navy ship, the Chesapeake. Abducted 4 American sailors as deserters from the Royal Navy. American system. Henry Clay's comprehensive national plan for economic growth included protective tariffs for American industry and government investments in roads and other internal improvements. New York meeting in 1848 of rights for women. Seneca Falls Convention. This is really important. Largest rebellion in U.S. history where 50 to 60 whites died and many slaves in 1831. This is Nat Turner's insurrection. Embargo Act of 1807. The cornerstone of peaceable coercion that attempted to block U.S. trade with England and France to force them to respect American neutrality. The Embargo Act of 1807 was the cornerstone of peaceable coercion that attempted to block U.S. trade with England and France to force them to respect American neutrality. His colony in Oneida, New York, encouraged sexual freedom. John Humphrey. Second Great Awakening facts started in the late 1790s, peaks in the 1830s. African American, and young women, they believed in the importance of rebirth. Baptist and Methodist big. Crossword puzzles. What? Crossword puzzles. Okay. Farming the Midwest. John Deere plow. Cyrus McCormick invented the reaper. Fulton invention, 1807. Steamboat. I think it was John Fulton. Fulton invented the steamboat. Compromise in 1820, where land south of the 3630 slave north is free. So this is the Missouri Compromise. Really, really important. Accused of playing billiards in the White House, John Adams. Yeah, that was a slanderous ad put out that he was playing billiards in the White House. Sent first transatlantic cable, Cyrus Westfield. The first transatlantic cable, this allowed telecommunication between North America and Europe. This is really, really big. Founder of the Mormons, Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is Joseph Smith, who was a rapist and a polygamist. Author of Walden, Henry Thoreau. Walden was written by Henry David Thoreau. Electoral College picked electors to choose the president. What? No. Electoral College is comprised of electors who choose the president. It's not. They don't pick anything. Okay, so the Electoral College, when you vote for president, you vote for an elector who is a member of the Electoral College, and that elector is generally supposed to vote for who you voted, who the population voted for, but he doesn't have to. He can vote for whoever he wants, but out of tradition, he votes for whoever his electorate voted for, and they decide who the president is ultimately. I think it's kind of a bullshit system. Garrison's newspaper pushing for immediate end to slavery. The Liberator. Okay. The Liberator was a newspaper that Garrison had. I don't know what his first name is, but Garrison's newspaper, and it pushed for immediate end to slavery. Is a very abolitionist paper. Second place finisher in presidential campaign was the vice president during this time. Amendment giving states' rights not granted by the federal government, the 10th Amendment. Andrew Jackson facts. Andrew Jackson, he balanced the federal budget where there was no national debt. That's quite a concept. First president to ride on a train, and Jackson was the common man's president. Maysville Road, linking Maysville to Lexington, bill vetoed by Jackson, and controversy because it didn't go anywhere outside of that one state. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Waldo Emerson was an American essayist, lecturer, and poet who led the Transcendentalist movement in the mid-19th century. Harrison attacked Tecumseh at this place, Tippecanoe. So Harrison attacked Tecumseh at Tippecanoe. Won the election in 1828 plus 32. What? Leader at NO, LA, 700 Brits killed. New Orleans, leader of New Orleans, Louisiana, 700 Brits killed. So this is Andrew Jackson won the election in 1820. I don't know what the 32 means, but we know all about him. Assumption of state debts. This was a Hamilton scheme for the federal government to take over any outstanding state debts. I don't know why he'd want to do that, but he did. Invention revolutionized Africa agriculture thanks to Eli Whitney. That's cotton gin. Transcendentalism is a loose set of ideas that look to nature for inspiration and insights. Phrenology was linked to this. Old Hickory. Well, that's a nickname for General Andrew Jackson. Old Hickory tree. They brought kindergarten beer and Christmas tree to America. This is the Germans. Trade and Jefferson. Jefferson said, I have come to the resolution never again to purchase any article foreign made which can be made in America. I feel like I'm really repeating myself at this point. Peculiar institution. A term that John C. Calhoun coined to describe Southern slavery. It was a peculiar institution. In Calhoun's view, slavery was not an evil or a cause of shame, but rather a positive good to be championed. But it was still peculiar for some reason. Alien and Sedition Acts. 4 laws designed to protect America from the danger of foreign and domestic subversion. First 3, the alien laws. That with immigration and naturalization. The Sedition Act criminalized criticism of the federal government. This is a really, really big deal. It was, this goes against everything that the country was founded on, and it didn't last very long. Women. Okay, they are the female sex of our species. Mott, Stanton, and Anthony all pushed for equal rights and voting for women. It didn't happen until 1920 with the 19th Amendment, and of course by that time all of the original supporters were long dead. Contributions of Germans in America. Well, they brought beer, food like sauerkraut and hamburgers, words like ouch, Alzheimer, aspirin, blitz, delicatessen, deli, which is a deli, Fahrenheit, nickel, dumb, and dunk, Christmas tree with candles, Easter bunny, kindergarten. This secretary advises the president on foreign affairs as Secretary of State. Whiskey Rebellion. An armed uprising in western Pennsylvania and Kentucky farmers protesting the whiskey excise tax instituted by Hamilton in 1791, and it peaked in 1794. 15,000 militiamen under Washington and Hamilton put down the rebellion. I'm definitely repeating myself now. Horace Mann's vision of educational reform. Horace Mann. Citizens cannot maintain both ignorance and freedom. This was an important concept because a populace that is going to maintain free has to be smart, because ignorance leads to tyranny. This is like really, really big concept. This education should be paid for, controlled, and maintained by the public. This education should be provided in schools that embrace children from varying backgrounds. This education must be non-sectarian. This education must be taught with tenets of free society. This education must be provided by well-trained professional teachers. Hamilton's plan. Sell public land, excise tax on whiskey, protective tariffs, consolidate federal and state debt, sell bonds. At the time, $77 million in debt. Era of good feelings. This was a term coined to describe the absence of bitter partisan conflict during the presidency of Monroe. Act to not allow speaking out against the government. The Sedition Act. This is ridiculous. Electoral College. A group of electors appointed by each state who had the responsibility of picking the president. Lewis and Clark. 10 a month pay and 400. Oh, hang on. I guess I saw this problem. Pick a time. Let me pick a time. It's trying to restart my computer right now. Hang on. Okay. Okay, all right, let me get back onto this. Lewis and Clark took 10 a month pay and 410 a month pay, $10 a month, I don't know, 400 acres of land. They took presents, beads, blue handkerchiefs, tobacco, pipe, shirts for the 53 tribes that they would meet. The Arch in St. Louis was the gateway to the West. One person from the crew died because of appendicitis. The election in 1824 and the corrupt bargain was the term presidential candidate Jackson supporters used to attack the alliance between John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay that deprived Jackson of the presidency. Invents cotton gin in 1792. Eli Whitney, how many times are we going to... Frenchman said that American society is very equal in democracy in America. Okay, he says that the American society is very equal in democracy in America. Okay. Alexis de Tocqueville. Trail of Tears, of course, says the Trail of Tears was a series of forced removals of Native American nations from their ancestral homelands in the southeastern United States to an area west of the Mississippi River that had been designated as Indian Territory. They grew enough food, this was like Ohio, I think. They grew enough food to feed their families in 1815, these farmers. Immediatism. An abolitionist doctrine that rejected gradualism and advocated an immediate end to slavery. William Lloyd Garrison was a leading advocate. He was the one that had that abolitionist paper. His anti-slavery newspaper, Liberator, American Colonization Society Liberia, Africa, formed in 1816 to send free African Americans back to the west coast of Africa. Of course, that was not ideal. Bank veto speech. Jackson's veto of a bill to recharter the Bank of the United States, which he explained he opposed that bank. Van Buren, Jackson's VP, won in 1836. We don't want a national bank. That's a bad deal. All right, that's